So you were talking about growth mindset, I understand. So let's go ahead.
Yeah. Mindy was asking about whether I sort of view it as just sort of the trendy new term or whatnot. And I think that it is important. I have mixed feelings about it. Because in one way, a lot of interventions, historical interventions that people have done, have attempted to make our students resilient, right? But I'm like, but we shouldn't be making them resilient, right? We should be creating classrooms in which they don't have to be resilient, right? They're tired of being resilient. But on the flip side, so in that way, sometimes I feel like the growth mindset feels like that when the way some people talk about it. But on the flip side, right, is I do know, right, that students are going to look around and be like, so-and-so over here is getting an A, everything's coming easy to them. Why is this so hard for me? It must be because I'm dumb and I'm never going to get it, right? And so like, I know that sort of self-narration is also existing. But I think where it's most important is not in the student. I think that the professors or the instructors need to have a growth mindset. When the instructor has a growth mindset, they project out to their students that this is going to be hard, or this could be hard for some of us, but that we can persist, and they provide opportunities. Let me rephrase, take that a step back. If an instructor is expressing a growth mindset and yet they never allow students to revise and resubmit homework, assignments, exams, then it's false, right? They're saying something that they are not actually executing and backing themselves up on. Because a growth mindset implies that you make mistakes, you learn from your mistakes, and you improve. And if we don't follow that through, then it is just a fancy word, a hot thing for the moment. So moral of the story is I have complicated feelings about growth mindset.
I do too. And that's why I brought that up, because I do have very complicated, like I believe in it, but at the same time, like I don't have the time to always deal with it. I mean, meaning like I can't have reassessment for everything. But I want them to grow. So finding ways for them to grow, to trust me, is something that I have trouble with.
And when we've discussed this the past couple times, we sort of hit that ideal that, like, I don't know if there are many people who are anti-growth mindset. However, is it something to be actively introduced? Is it something to be striven for, or is it something that can just be sort of baked into what you do? That was what I struggled with when considering this, how explicit you could or should be in trying to introduce this to your students. I've certainly never tried to make a deliberate introduction of it, but I've tried to model, the idea of getting away from you've either got it or you don't, that kind of attitude. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I'm trying. Oh, this one. There was an article that, instead of focusing on student growth mindset, focused on the faculty growth mindset, and how that impacted student outcomes. I'll have to look for it. I'm not very good at multitasking, so one focused person. Yeah, it's hard. But I don't know.
All right, well, we can leave it at that. It's just certainly an interesting consideration of certainly wanting your students to have that mindset. Yeah. Did you guys get a chance to talk about trust in my absence, or is that something we should circle back to?
No, I totally went to growth mindset first.
Okay, cool. And so the other idea here of building trust with your students, and we had talked previously about transparency, about talking to your students about your motivations, your objectives, writing a very clear syllabus that explains why you're doing what you do as probably your most direct path to having trust in the process. And so I'm curious what you guys might do to try to achieve that with your own classes.
I don't know. I don't actively think about how I'm doing it. That's the problem.
And it could very well be that means you're doing it well, right? That you don't actually have to think about it that much.
Or I'm not doing it well and I should be thinking it. I mean, you can totally flip that around. Like, I don't really know how I would know if I have my students' trust. I mean, think that they come into college, think that they're going to trust their instructors for doing it the right way, but maybe not.
I think it's more than just, I think there's also the piece of, do they think that I have some understanding and appreciation and interest in them, right? As a full human, right? So I'm thinking about sometimes, you'll hear students be like, so-and-so assigned so much work. What do they think? This is the only class and the only thing I'm doing? Like, I've got 3 other classes. I've got 2 labs. I work. I'm in a sport. Like, I can't spend this many hours a week on that course. And so what that is telling me is, right, they don't trust their instructor because they don't think, seems to be accurately so, that their instructor has any real concept of who their students are, what's impacting them, and what they care about, right? It's also why I laugh. It hasn't happened, it didn't happen for a while because, shit went sideways, but I remember at the end of every semester, people would get on the faculty list. When I was at my smaller institution, we had an all faculty list. And it essentially came out to like, kids these days, all they want to do is like hang out with their friends and play sports. And why don't they just want to study for my class all the time? I'm like, are you fucking kidding? Sorry for the swearing. Are you kidding me? Like, of course that's what they want to do.
What did you want to do when you were that age?
Okay, you were clearly a giant nerd in college and apparently didn't want to do those things. But I think that there are instructors who lose sight of their students as a whole person.
That's true. I guess I do have to. I mean, like, I try to be very good about breaks. Like, I'm like, we don't have any work. I want you to do nothing. I don't want you to think about my course. I want you to decompress. When you come back, I explained, I want you to come back refreshed because you're not thinking about my course like during that time. So I do try to like have that sort of a relationship with them.
Yeah, I think literally just saying that to them and building that in is one way that you build trust, right? Like the instructors who are like, we're going to have this 25-page paper in an exam the day after break because you have all of break to work on it. Like, oh, do I?
And with that, I hate to leave, but I actually have to go teach my big class.
Oh, good. Now these things will be fresh in your mind, right?
I was just thinking that I'm gonna start my class because I've been distracting myself a lot with like YouTube videos on kittens and puppies. So I'm gonna start the class by asking them what distracts them because I need some more distractions.
Or just open right up with, you people trust me? Let's talk about it.
I mean, I'm building this relationship. What YouTube and TikTok videos are you watching? So I can. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much.
It's just me and you, Mike. Maybe we can cut this. Well, we can talk more, but also probably not for as long.
Right. So buy-in. And buy-in sort of ties. To me, the trust and the buy-in are not interchangeable, but they are intimately related in terms of, the one leading to the other. And so when they're talking here about the persuasion and things like that, I certainly think of that with respect to, well, if you don't trust me, my persuasion's not going to be very good. And so I know they distinctly separate them here. And in fact, I do want to allude to the stats, and I'm not going to pretend I understand, but like the idea that I did read about the packets. I thought the packets were very interesting here, that they had so many different variables that they randomly put them in the group so they could then test them individually. So I got that part, why there's so many extra boxes here. But besides that, just the idea of how this whole model fits together. And to me, the trust and the persuasion are almost the same thing in respect to absolutely requiring the one to get to the other. So when it comes to these techniques, I mean, I think it's just a matter, at least for me, of transparency, being explicit, trying to assuage them too on the stakes involved. That I try, you just mentioned, right, midterm and a final or some version of that, that the things we're doing, that there are no individual things that are so big point wise that it's going to kill you if you don't understand it or get it. So I think a combination of all those works on my end. How do you approach this?
I mean, back in the before times, because I've mostly
Yeah,
been
when
working with
one taught classes, yes.
yeah, well, back when, look, because now I've been working with my adults for a while. And
That's right.
The great part there is I don't grade them.
Oh my God. That'd be a dream.
Not to say I don't provide feedback to
Yeah.
them. I don't grade them. Anyway, so back in the before times, yes. So it was interesting. So I taught introductory biology, which was obviously a multi-section course, multiple instructors. And then I also taught upper division genetics, which was, just me. And in the introductory biology class, because we had some very traditional instructors, we had essentially had a requirement or a limit on how much our homework could be worth in our grade. So 25% of the course was lab. So then it was sort of this remaining 75%. And that percentage could only go up to 20% for anything that wasn't essentially an exam. And then we also had a requirement on the amount of exam, we were all supposed to give the same number of exams. So in that way, like, at least everybody, like, nobody was just doing a midterm and a final, right? There were 5 exams in the course. So in that way it was spread out. But there were also some people that could, I mean, an option was to do 0% homework. So at which point 75% of the course becomes exam.
Yeah.
And that was an allowed option, whereas you were not allowed to go more than 20% on your homework. And I bristled at that a bit.
Yeah.
And I did shit to get around it.
Clever
like,
reclassifications of assignments. Yeah.
Well, and also like opportunities to do things and then earn points back on your exam.
I like it.
Oh man, it's a good thing I don't work there anymore. The stuff that I did, if they ever found out. When I first started, we had a very like content driven intro. It was like, here's this like giant document of learning objectives for every chapter of the book, and we are marching through this book. And I just didn't tell anybody, and I would be like, not going to talk about that. Nope. And I just was like, no. And maybe it was because I was 28 and really realistic about what I remembered from when I was 18. Like, it just wasn't that long ago. And I was like, nobody's going to remember that.
Exactly.
So anyway, so moral of the story is, when I was, when I believe in distributing your points more broadly, and also allowing for that growth mindset piece. So I had them do exam evaluations where they were to look at their exam, like actually pull it out of the crumpled bottom of their backpack, and say, like, for everything I got wrong, they were asked to classify it according to, like, they literally didn't know the answer. They misunderstood the question. They didn't have enough time, right? There was a number of options, and they classified it. And then they also were then asked to describe how they studied. And then they were asked to look for patterns, right? So and we, up to this point, we'd also been talking about how do you learn? So they had some assignments on best practices for learning. And then they were asked to create a plan for exam 2. Like what are you going to do differently so that, you improve your score wherever your score was, right? How are we going to move upwards?
Right. Not just for people who
like
not just for people who bombed it, but for people who simply want to improve. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I tried to incorporate those pieces. Like I said, I also did assignments on learning. So it wasn't I used these learning, they're called the learning scientists.
Mhm.
They have a website, they're really great, but they incorporated some of the biology, right? Explaining how your brains and your neurons function. And that this is why this is a better practice for learning, and they love that. So I tried those pieces as well. And then I was also just super flexible. Like I would just be like, you know what? We're just gonna ignore this, we're just cutting this out and we are gonna do this other piece over again. And that's what we're doing. Just like we're still stuck here. We're not gonna move on. We're gonna stay here and we'll have to cut this other thing out. And that's fine.
You're like Dead Poet Society. You rip the chart out of the textbook and we're doing this next thing.
I always explain to them that, one of the reasons I liked being a professor is I liked being in charge.
Yeah.
Or I could just be like, no, we're not going to do that. Delete it.
My own little kingdom, right?
Right, we're going to do this other thing now. So.
And then that brings us to engagement. And it's, I think, hard to talk about engagement distinctly, because if at this point you've established what you're doing and you're doing the implementation, one presumes that what you are involved in is some kind of engaged process, or at least for us here at Palm, right? That is our objective, that the number one thing we're trying to attain is engagement. So this would allow us just a natural extension, I think, of the active learning practices we're doing as forms of engagement. People this week have brought up clicker questions, people have brought up group activities, people have brought up long-term projects, anything that relates to the idea of having the students play an integral role in their own educations as opposed to passive observers of it. So
yeah, what I love about my adults that I work with is, some of them are fresh out of college, but I would say the vast majority of them have really only been exposed to traditional lecture. And then that's not what's happening in my space. And one of the things that they all love, and a lot of our meetings have been online because of COVID, they're like, we love the breakout rooms. We love, and I almost always try and partner them up with people outside of their group, right? So if they are in manufacturing, I'll put them with a quality assurance person, right? And try and mix them up like that. And they love it.
interesting.
They are so into being able to talk and discuss these generally application pieces with somebody outside of their group. I'm like, yeah, all right. So they are all in and engaged on that. And part of me feels bad because this company actually has a training group that their main role is onboarding new hires, but they just slog through it. It's like, we're moving through, I'm going to talk to you. I'm probably going to ask some really crappy questions nobody wants to answer and then throw you a piece of candy, those times. I feel kind of bad because I feel like I might be, this is going to sound arrogant, making them look bad, but I'm providing an alternative way of educating, right? And they really do love it.
It's
now,
really
that's not always the case with undergrads, is it?
Yeah, I was about to say that's really interesting, because I literally was just in a class today where I think they would find that painful. But I definitely appreciate if it's something you're used or not used to, and maybe you're not in that younger stage where you don't care as much anymore about what other people think of you, frankly, that absolutely could make a big difference. So that's pretty cool.
When I think some of the other benefits, I think I mentioned this with you before, is I did a lot of research into andragogy, right? How adults learn best. before starting these people.
Andrew.
And some of the pieces I really pull on, right, is their lived experience, that these contexts that I'm having them discuss are relevant. And so I incorporate a lot of these pieces of andragogy into what they're doing. And I think that really ups their engagement. And to be honest, a lot of those pieces are totally relevant in the undergraduate classroom as well, right? And there are things that we talk about in terms of like providing context that is relevant, right, to these students. So if you have a bunch of students who have never been to the Galapagos, they're not really that into environmental stuff because they're pre-health people, using an example of Darwin's finches is probably going to be real boring for them. So providing a variety of context to reach a wider audience. So it's very easy for me because I'm putting it into the context of their actual jobs, right? So they're clearly invested in it. I know this audience and what they're interested in. That makes it a lot easier. But I think a lot of what I have learned from working with these adults, I will definitely be taking with me into the undergraduate realm. And I think a lot of it really is very similar to what we talk about when we talk about active learning and the benefits of that. So
it's not exactly the same thing, of course, but it's like take what you learned in all the COVID stuff and adopt it for your traditional environment. If you're able to take what you're doing with adults and adopt it to your undergrads, that is equally useful. So that's pretty neat in terms of, what can I do to make them less skittish about that kind of breakout room, small group. Cool.
Yeah. And of course the ungrading piece, right? Ungrading has become so popular in the last year or so with that book and so many book clubs that read it. And I'm sitting here going, well, I haven't had to grade anybody in 2 years.
So how does that work? I actually don't know much about it.
So the concept of, so they do embrace a wide definition of ungrading. So, some people do specifications grading, right? Which is basically like, if you do 10 out of 10 of these things adequately as based on these criteria, then you're going to get an A. And if you do 9 out of 10, it's a B. 8 out of 10, it's a C, right? So that's specifications grading. But then it does
that with its non-majors class. Like, here's what you need to do to get a C. Here's what you need to do to get a B. Yeah.
And it does go on the other end of the spectrum as well, which is, essentially like some people create like a portfolio thing where you have assignments and people turn things in, and then there's a lot of metacognitive things that are built in terms of reflecting on the process and the product and what you're going to do next time and blah, blah, blah. And so you create this larger portfolio, and then you have there's been a variety of ways that people implement it, but essentially the student makes the case for what grade they deserve. And then they have to provide evidence that supports that conclusion. But what they all do is they take a growth mindset piece. All of these ungrading formats allow for students to reflect on what they've done and make changes to improve it, right? And so they really do emphasize the growth mindset piece and the trust piece, right? Because you're creating this relationship and this conversation with your instructor. You're relying on their feedback and their ability to structure a metacognitive, an opportunity to effectively reflect and make changes. And so I think they really focus on those first two pieces. I think so there's it's a pretty diverse group of people that say that they do ungrading.
Yeah, no, when you describe it, it's more familiar. I just didn't know what a different term. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, and it's great. And then there are people who are like, well, I have to have exams, but then I do ungrading for all homework, right? And so they find themselves in a hybrid piece, right, where they allow students, if you will. Yeah. So, make your case for whatever you want, but it's definitely that growth mindset piece.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think we've made our way through the model here. And with just the two of us, I think we're all set. I do appreciate it, the idea. Yeah,
Now it's lunchtime.
exactly. And I'll see you at our next meeting that's tomorrow. Yes, I'll see you tomorrow.
So I'm actually going to be on an airplane tomorrow. I feel like you're only scheduling Friday meetings on the Fridays that don't work for me.
It's been the most Fridays, but yeah, it's not with malice
I
aforethought.
know, but there was one that we like skipped and I was like, damn it, that's the Friday I could go. No, I've had like a weird couple of Fridays, but like my Fridays will be more normal here.
Okay.
And obviously I'm not normally on an airplane, but
Of course.
I will be tomorrow. So,
All right. Well, have a good trip.
but I will see you next week on Friday.
Excellent.
Bye.
Bye.